Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into the refined, disciplined, and often harsh world of feudal Japan, a society built on samurai honor, rigid codes, and consequences sharper than the swords they wielded. It's a land of cherry blossoms and poetic beauty, wrapped around a daily routine that would have most of us defeated before noon. Before we get into it, feel free to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy what I create here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always enjoy seeing the range of viewers across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a calming hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. In feudal Japan, you don't choose your life path. It's chosen for you, determined by your birth, your lineage, and the decisions of ancestors long past. Your position in society isn't a choice, it's a sentence. Born into a samurai family, that's your identity now. You're responsible for mastering the sword, the bow, and the subtle art of sitting with precise etiquette in front of your lord. Born a peasant, then mud, labor, and generational hardship are your inheritance. And your children's too. There are no resumes, no start your own venture. You're assigned a role, samurai, peasant, artisan, or merchant, and that's where you remain. Attempting to rise above your class isn't just discouraged, it's a punishable offense. You don't climb the ranks in feudal Japan, you bow to them, and that doesn't even include the ETA, the so-called untouchables. These were butchers, executioners, leather workers, people who managed death and dirt. Society relied on them but pretended they didn't exist. Essential but invisible. Ghosts with necessary duties. Even within the hierarchy, things are complicated. A merchant, for example, might sound successful. They've got money, after all. But in feudal Japan, that's near the bottom of the ladder. Why? Because they profit without manual labor. Morally questionable in this worldview. Meanwhile, peasants were taxed so heavily on their rice that giving too much meant starvation. But hiding some? That was treason. Both options could cost you your life. Samurai lived with honor, yes, but also under a constant cloud of fear. Fear of offending their lord, their ancestors, their swordsmith, or even sneezing at the wrong time. And women? You didn't ask, but here's the truth. Your fate was sealed too. No matter your class, your autonomy ended where your father's opinion began. You'd marry who you were told to, obey those above you, and consider yourself lucky if allowed to study poetry. So yes, you were born into a role, given a costume, handed a script, and expected to play your part without protest. Elegant, poetic, and suffocatingly inescapable. And that's just before breakfast. You might imagine feudal life as dirty or chaotic, but Japan took cleanliness seriously, almost religiously. It sounds nice, until winter arrives. The day begins with washing, not in a warm bathroom with soft towels, but at a stone basin filled with icy water fetched from a nearby stream. No heater, no bargaining. You splash your face and arms, shivering like your ancestors are punishing you for being alive. Soap? Only if you're wealthy, and even then it's made from ash or rice bran and smells like a monk's endurance test. In villages, the local bathhouse, if there is one, is the center of hygiene and social life, heated by firewood, filled with neighbors, and absolutely devoid of privacy. You bathe naked, silently, next to everyone from your boss to your landlord. Scrub. First, soak later. Cleanliness is sacred. If you dirty the bathwater, you might as well leave town. No bathhouse. Then you clean what you can, when you can. Teeth with salt or twigs, nails trimmed, clothes aired out. Not because it's fashionable, but because being dirty is a moral failing. Samurai face even higher standards. Your lord might inspect you, head to toe at any moment. Dirty fingernails, dishonor, a wrinkled robe, disrespect, body odor. You might not be allowed to rise from your bow. Women were expected to smell like cherry blossoms and discipline. Skincare was ritualized. Hair took hours to style, all for the privilege of working a rice mortar in elegance. So yes, feudal Japan was clean, obsessively so, but the cost was freezing water, endless grooming, and the crushing certainty that someone somewhere was judging your hygiene. Let's say you're born a samurai. Sounds noble. Fine robes, beautiful swords, cherry blossom jewels. But here's the catch. Being a samurai wasn't about slashing swords and shouting for honor. It was about never making a mistake. Your life was ruled by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code so strict it made even your ancestors nervous. You didn't live for yourself. You lived for your daimyo, your lord. His word was law. His moods, your weather. Your loyalty had to be so absolute you'd rather die in agony than disappoint him slightly. Disobedience, dishonor, speaking out of turn, dishonor, looking at someone the wrong way during tea, still dishonor. And dishonor wasn't brushed off, it was answered with your life, literally. That's seppuku, ritual suicide carried out with a short blade. Yes, this was real. A disgraced samurai might be given a dagger in a private room. No words, just you know what to do. Samurai trained relentlessly, swordplay, archery, horseback riding, military strategy, calligraphy, poetry, all while maintaining perfect posture and the solemn expression of a man who has never laughed. Laugh too loud. Crude. Show fear or emotion. Weakness. Your clothes must be immaculate, your sword gleaming, your behavior so dignified it made everyone else uneasy. Lose a duel, raise your sword without cause, insult someone above you. That wasn't just failure. It was the end. Being a samurai wasn't about glory. It was about discipline, silence, and avoiding a fatal misstep every single day. So, you're not a samurai. That's a relief. No swords, no haiku, no risk of ritual suicide. But here's the downside. You're a peasant. That means your life is one long exercise in dirt, sweat, and government-controlled rice quotas. You rise with the sun, not out of harmony with nature, but because the tax deadline doesn't wait. Your hut has no windows, no doors, and there's a goat on your sleeping mat. Breakfast? Maybe some rice porridge and a scrap of last week's pickles. Or maybe just hunger and river water. Then it's off to the rice fields, picturesque in postcards, soul-crushing in real life. 12 hours of planting and weeding in the mud, hoping no bandits attack. You return exhausted to find something's missing. Your ox, your harvest, or maybe your patience. The village headman wants answers. There's no cash payment. You pay in rice. Whatever your family eats comes from what's left, if there's any. If the harvest fails, or if your lord's nephew tramples your field during training, tough luck. Complain? That's cute. Punishments range from beatings to exile to becoming fertilizer. If you make it to village elder, congrats. People now ignore. Your advice formally, you're legally barred from leaving your village. You're a rice farmer and prisoner with occasional ankle rot. Festivals happen, some dancing, some sack, but always with the knowledge that planting starts again in 4 days. You are the backbone of the economy, the reason samurai eat, and yet completely invisible. Days off. Not in this society. Feudal. Japan believed in hard work, inherited suffering, and keeping expectations at ground level. You're starving. Of course you are. You've been working since dawn, and now it's time to eat. But meals in feudal Japan aren't about comfort. They're about staying alive. If you're a peasant, your meals are rice, more rice, and bonus rice. Sometimes it's barley pretending to be rice. Maybe a turnip, pickled radish, if the gods smile. Meat? Only if you misplace a chicken. Fish? Dried and sharp enough to cut glass. Soup? Usually miso, or what passes as miso, salty hot water with 2 floating leaves, flavorful in the way seawater is hydrating. Samurai get better food, but eat last, after their lord, his guests, and whoever else needs impressing. Cold rice, cold soup, and the pleasure of watching others eat first. Food is seasonal, not for trendiness, but because there's no refrigeration or imports. Winter means less eating, And food poisoning? Hope you like thinking about your ancestors because they might be welcoming you soon. Steal food? You're not getting a warning. You're getting an example made out of you. Tea exists, but the ceremony is more performance than refreshment. It's about posture and humility, not hydration. So yes, meals were quiet, sacred, and usually underwhelming. And no, you can't complain. Not unless you want your next bowl served via disciplinary technique, so you've finished your humble bowl of ambiguous fish soup. Someone says something absurd, maybe a bad haiku or a claim that his cow can predict rain. You think, about correcting them, don't. In feudal Japan, opinions are dangerous. Free speech doesn't exist. Say the wrong thing and you're not just impolite. You're exiled, disgraced, or dead. The hierarchy is strict and every word carries weight. Speak out of turn, you're disrespectful. Criticize above your class, insolent. Make a joke that flops, borderline treason. Even at home, it's delicate. Sons don't interrupt fathers. Wives don't correct husbands. And absolutely no one questions the daimyo unless they're eager to be decapitated. Samurai are trained to speak calmly, even when furious. A sharp tongue is worse than a blunt sword. It's disgraceful, it's provocative, and it might force someone to kill you just to restore balance, which leads us to apologies. In layers of silk robes, sometimes armored, always dignified, are worn with purpose. Every fold, every color, signals rank and readiness. Deep blues, muted browns, and the occasional splash of blood red create a look that's both refined and subtly threatening, as if to say, I've killed for less than a fashion mistake. Then there are the swords. A samurai's daisho, the long and short pair, isn't just weaponry, it's a symbol of status. Drawing them in public is a last resort. Wearing them incorrectly? That earns a swift, sharp lesson in etiquette. Peasants wear cotton in muted tones, brown, grey and beige. It's not a stylistic choice, it's economics. Dyes are costly, and when you're working from dawn to dusk just to survive, colour coordination isn't a priority. Their clothes announce, I work in the fields, and these are my only sandals. Merchants can afford finer fabrics, but because they rank socially below samurai, and even peasants, they dress with restraint, subtle silks, nothing flashy. Their aim is to appear prosperous, but not provocative. They've mastered the art of blending in just enough to avoid catching the eye of a bored patrol. Artisans and craftsmen opt for neat, durable, and functional clothing. Their goal is not to stand out. Attracting attention is seen as poor taste. Women's attire is its own complex system. Every element, from hair to kimono patterns, carries layered meaning. Colors and designs must match the season or occasion, or risk public embarrassment and family dishonor. A mismatched outfit can ignite weeks of neighborhood gossip. In this society, clothing communicates not just fashion, but hierarchy, ritual, and the constant pressure to maintain face. You might picture moonlit strolls beneath cherry blossoms, whispered poetry under lanterns, maybe even a stolen kiss between a samurai and a forbidden noblewoman. Not likely. In feudal Japan, love is a background detail rarely prioritized. Marriage isn't about affection, it's about alliances, status, land, and taxes. If you're a peasant, your marriage is arranged by your parents or village elders. Romantic feelings aren't considered. What matters is strong limbs and a good set of teeth. For samurai families, the stakes are even higher. Marriages solidify. Clan ties resolve disputes and transfer property. Happiness is irrelevant. Stability is the goal. Love letters. Perhaps, but only in elegant calligraphy, with seasonal metaphors, discreetly delivered by a maid who knows more than she lets on. Women have even less say. A samurai daughter might be married off at 15, having trained in etiquette, embroidery, and the fine art of silent endurance. Her duties: bear sons, serve tea, and never fall for someone inappropriate, like the flute teacher. Romantic love with passion and longing belongs to plays, poems, and ghost stories. If you're seeking love in feudal Japan, your best hope is watching a no-drama about doomed lovers who dissolve into mist. Step outside approved boundaries, and the consequences are severe. Exile, disgrace, even death. Adultery might be punished by your spouse, your lord, or your in-laws, whoever gets to you first. Even for samurai, taking a concubine was accepted, but it only added complexity, not affection. So yes, people fell in love, secretly, painfully, often at the worst time. Because love here isn't banned, it's just highly inconvenient. In feudal Japan, death isn't distant, it's constant. It's your neighbor, your colleague, that silent presence that never leaves. You don't plan for retirement, you plan your death. For samurai, death is structured. If you lose a battle, seppuku, dishonor your name, seppuku, spill sake on your lord's robe, seppuku, complete with ceremonial precision and internal bleeding. It's a public act, as ritualized as the tea ceremony. Peasants don't fare better. A failed harvest means starvation. If the village can't meet tax quotas, your head might become a warning sign. Drought, plague, raids, take your pick. Medicine is mostly hot tea and hopeful herbs. Bandits are real and they don't care how hard you worked on your turnips. Roads are so unsafe, people avoid travel entirely. A casual, "we'll visit next year" really means, "I enjoy living." Childbirth is hazardous. Midwives help, but surgical intervention is limited to boiling another towel. If your husband dies in disgrace, you might be expected to join him in death. And nature, relentless. Earthquakes, floods, famines. Japan is both beautiful and brutal. Your home might be flattened, your crops ruined. The only insurance is spiritual calm and well-tied rafters. But perhaps the hardest part? You're expected to accept it all. Panic is shameful. A proper death involves bowing, writing a poem, and meeting the end with grace, as if it were just another formal family dinner. Yes, feudal Japan is stunning, but mortality is part of the aesthetic. Today, we're told to follow our dreams and embrace individuality. In feudal Japan, your role is assigned. Individualism isn't encouraged. It's dangerous. You're not a solitary star, but a single branch on a vast family tree. Your job is to keep that tree intact by avoiding embarrassment, like sharing opinions or dating outside your station. Your clan defines you. Your identity, your future, your social standing, it all flows from your family name. You live within a dense web of duty, honor, and unspoken rules. Even samurai don't fight for themselves. They serve their lord, protect their household, and honor their ancestors. Ideally, if they die, it's in a way that uplifts everyone above them. Your actions reflect on your father, whose choices reflect on his father. A mistake you make could affect cousins you've never met. Want to open a noodle shop because you love cooking? That's nice. But if your clan breeds horses, you'll be cleaning stables. Interested in art, you'll paint family shrines quietly and exactly as instructed. And scandal? Forget it. One ill-timed affair or inappropriate poem can bring shame upon everyone. Your siblings will be shunned. Your mother will be humiliated. Your uncle may have to commit ritual suicide to salvage the family name. You aren't just a person. You're a representative, a liability, a pawn. But if you play your part, bow properly, and marry as ordered, you might one day earn your clan's respect. That's as close to a personal achievement award as it gets. Now let's say you've managed to navigate the complex social codes, the strict hierarchies, and the constant threats of violence. Great. Now try surviving the weather. Feudal Japan is breathtaking. Snowy peaks, peaceful forests, flowering trees, and home to extreme natural chaos. The land is beautiful. The climate is hostile. Start with typhoons. Huge storms strike with fury, tearing off roofs, washing away crops and turning villages into driftwood. Earthquakes hit without warning. No alarms, just a low rumble and then chaos. If the tremor doesn't get you, the fires might. Everything's made of wood, after all. Flooding happens frequently. A few days of heavy rain, and your village turns into a muddy basin. Crops drown, livestock wander off, and your landlord still demands payment, now with interest. Then there are droughts, weeks of sun with no rain leave cracked earth and empty fields. You perform rituals, make offerings, and begin watching your neighbors well with suspicion. Winter, it's not picturesque, it's punishing. Thin blankets, dying fires, and numb fingers are standard. Central heating doesn't exist. Everyone suffers together, huddled around clay braziers. Occasionally, a volcano erupts. Japan sits on the ring of fire, and eruptions can bury entire areas in ash and lava. One day you're tending a shrine, the next it's a pile of rocks. There's no emergency relief, no government help. You rebuild your house, you go hungry. You still owe taxes. In feudal Japan, nature isn't just scenery. It's a reminder that even divine forces can have bad days. Here, power flows from the top down, and so does responsibility. No matter who you are, someone outranks you. A peasant answers to the village headman, who reports to a local samurai, who serves a daimyo, who obeys the shogun, who might, just might, listen to the emperor, who mostly serves as a robed figurehead. Even samurai, the feared sword-bearers, aren't at the top. They're bound to their lords, carrying out orders and fighting in wars they didn't start, for rewards they'll never enjoy. They might be called noble, but in reality they're glorified middle managers with sharp blades. The daimyo, powerful. As they are, don't escape scrutiny either. Their rule depends on loyalty, tribute, and staying in the shogun's favor. In this rigid chain of command, everyone is accountable to someone higher, to tradition, to history. Feudal Japan isn't just a place. It's a system, intricate, unforgiving, and all-encompassing. Armies in feudal Japan might appear invincible until the shogun decides they've overstepped. Then suddenly their castles are being inspected, their correspondence intercepted, and their heads gently separated from their ambitions. Even the shogun, the military ruler and arguably the most powerful man in the country, must constantly watch the court, the clans, the economy, and at least 4 relatives trying to poison his tea. He rules, yes, but rarely sleeps soundly. The emperor technically outranks everyone, but holds no real authority. He's more like a sacred relic, untouchable but ever-present. His duties include blessing rituals, naming historical eras, and occasionally composing poetry. Financially, though, he's likely struggling. This social structure is rigid. You don't climb it. You're placed and expected to remain there, like an obedient bonsai. Ambition isn't admired, it's feared. The higher you rise, the more vulnerable you become. Respect flows upward, authority pushes downward, orders are followed, not debated. Disagreement is dangerous. Showing signs of overreaching your station isn't seen as aspiration. It's considered a death sentence in formal wear. Wherever you stand, peasant, merchant, samurai, or lord, someone above controls your destiny and someone below quietly hopes you stumble. In feudal Japan, what you learn, and whether you learn anything at all, depends entirely on your place in the hierarchy. Spoiler: if you're at the bottom, that hierarchy is mostly invisible and occasionally on fire. At the top, samurai children get the best of it. From an early age, they're trained in reading, writing, swordsmanship, etiquette, poetry, archery, and horseback riding, all while maintaining an unimpressed facial expression. A samurai boy learns how to write a death poem by age 14. You were likely still figuring out cursive. Their education is demanding but focused, to serve, protect, and never disgrace the clan. They study Chinese classics, Bushido principles, and how to bow with such precision that even the gods might take notes. Children of merchant and artisan families receive some schooling, usually arithmetic, record-keeping, and basic literacy. But it's purely practical. You're not studying Confucius. You're learning how to price pickled turnips in bulk. Useful? Absolutely. Glorious? Not exactly. Peasant children? Education begins and ends with tools. This is a hoe. This is rice. Now start working before the sun beats us to it. Parents teach survival, farming, and how to endure hardship without collapsing in front of the tax collector. Literacy is rare. Schools are a fantasy. The only reading material is likely the tax notice nailed to a tree. And girls, unless you're from the upper ranks, formal education is minimal. You're taught domestic skills, quiet grace, and how to complete housework with ceremonial precision. If you're very lucky, you might get some calligraphy or poetry lessons, as long as it doesn't interfere with laundry. Education in feudal Japan isn't about curiosity or growth. It's about performing your role without question. The idea of learning for pleasure would cause elders to faint into their sake cups. Knowledge meant power, which is exactly why it was so carefully controlled. Feudal Japan is visually stunning. From the arc of a fan to the angle of a teacup, everything seems designed to calm the spirit and honor the ancestors. But it comes with a catch. You'll be judged for doing it incorrectly. Culture isn't just art, it's performance, and mistakes have consequences. Flower arrangements, tea pouring, kimono folding, they all follow strict traditions older than your family name. One misplaced petal and suddenly you're the village joke. Take the tea ceremony. It may appear serene, but it's a social obstacle course. Every move is deliberate. Guests must sit correctly, rotate the cup twice, express modest thanks, and sip in silence, all while calculating whether their bow was too early, too late, or too eager. A misstep can seem awkward, or worse, evidence of poor upbringing. Calligraphy. Beautiful, yes, but also a test of discipline and inner alignment. Each brushstroke reveals your emotional balance. Sloppy handwriting signals not just clumsiness, but possibly poor character. Even poetry is high stakes. You don't just write a haiku, you write it in the correct season, on the right paper, using carefully chosen metaphor. Too emotional? You lack refinement. Too dry? You're spiritually cold. Too witty? You're showing off, and now you're off the guest list for the moon viewing party. Culture in this world is not a release. It's a trial. You participate not to relax, but to prove you are dignified, composed, and above all, terrified of appearing uncultured. Beauty in feudal Japan isn't casual, it's combat, dressed in silk. And if your flower arrangement breaks tradition, well, may the gods show more mercy than your neighbors. By now, we've seen the hierarchy, the customs, the honor code, and the omnipresent rice. Let's be honest, you wouldn't survive a single day in feudal Japan. Not because you're soft, but because this world wasn't designed for ease. It was built for strict order, flawless precision, and tireless obedience. Every moment tested your loyalty, posture, and ability to bow at the perfect angle, while delivering the proper seasonal greeting in just the right tone. Failing meant consequences. Public disgrace at best, ritual suicide at worst. There were no breaks, no room for individuality. You were born into a role, handed a script, and expected to perform it flawlessly for life. Breaking character wasn't brave, it was dangerous. The clan mattered. The lord mattered. The land mattered. You didn't. If you were a samurai, you bore centuries of honor, and the very real risk of writing poetry before ending your own life. If you were a peasant, you labored from dawn until your back curved into a question mark, hoping your harvest wasn't ruined by weather or war. If you were a woman, your life revolved around composure, silence, and self-sacrifice. And for everyone else, the system existed to keep you exactly where you started. Feudal Japan was breathtaking. Its architecture, rituals, and art were carefully refined. But that refinement had sharp edges. It demanded a discipline so fierce it could shatter bones, and a level of respect that left no space for self-expression. So no, you wouldn't make it. You'd laugh too loudly, speak too freely, or step across a threshold with the wrong foot. You'd forget to bow. You'd ask why. You'd want change. And that alone would make you a threat. That's the paradox, both the genius and the tragedy of feudal Japan. It wasn't meant to be fair. It was meant to last. Now picture a world where women were expected to be silent, obedient, and absolutely nowhere near a battlefield. In that world, Artemisia of Caria was an anomaly, someone who, by every rule of ancient society, shouldn't have existed. Yet there she was, a queen, a naval commander, and a force to be reckoned with. She ruled Halicarnassus, a coastal city in what's now southwest Turkey. Technically, under the Persian Empire, the city sat in a web of shifting powers. Artemisia didn't just inherit leadership, she transformed it into something formidable. She was Greek by ancestry, Persian in allegiance, and biologically female, three identities with enormous political weight in an age ruled by brute strength. Her father was likely Carian, her mother Cretan. When her husband died, she didn't step aside for a male heir. She took power herself, a subtle act of rebellion, but she didn't stop at governing. She prepared for war. When Xerxes the Great launched his invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, Artemisia made a bold move. She didn't offer prayers from afar. She offered warships, 5 of them, sleek, fast, deadly. And she didn't delegate command. She led them personally. Xerxes, ruler of an empire that spanned from India to Egypt, didn't just accept her presence, he respected her. Some called her decision reckless. A Greek siding with Persia. Treason. A woman in war. Absurd. But Artemisia wasn't guided by sentiment. She was strategic. She understood power, and she played the game better than most men around her. She declared war on her own people, the Greeks. It shocked many even before battle began. She was labeled a traitor in elegant clothing, a queen turned mercenary. But she didn't flinch. She walked into the Persian court like she belonged, and in many ways she did. Xerxes, surrounded by warriors and flatterers, found in her something rare: honesty, not flattery, not hesitation. She offered clear, piercing advice. In councils packed with generals and seasoned satraps, she spoke with precision and confidence. And she was often right. Before the Battle of Salamis, she warned Xerxes against engaging the Greek fleet directly, pointing out that narrow waters would cancel Persia's advantage. He ignored her, lured by pride and poor counsel, and paid the price. Even among Persians, her presence stirred resentment. She wasn't just a woman, she was a Greek woman giving orders and leading ships. She wasn't decoration, she was decisive, and that unsettled many battle-hardened commanders. Meanwhile, her reputation in Greece darkened. Herodotus, also from Halicarnassus, wrote about her with a strange mix of respect and confusion. He didn't quite understand her, few did, and suspicion, typically reserved for mythic beings, followed her. Some saw her as a Medusa in armor, others as a misunderstood genius, daring to think like a man and doing it better than most. Artemisia was many things: loyalist, strategist, traitor, visionary. But above all, she was a political force who grasped a hard truth of war. Identity is flexible, but power endures. If any moment put Artemisia's intelligence and nerve to the test, it was the Battle of Salamis. This wasn't just another conflict. It was the defining naval clash of the Greco-Persian Wars. The Persian navy, vast and overconfident, faced off against a smaller yet better-positioned Greek fleet in the tight straits near Athens. This was where Xerxes' grand campaign began to crumble, and where Artemisia would deliver one of the boldest tactical decisions of her life. Let's rewind for context. Artemisia had advised Xerxes against engaging the Greeks in such narrow waters. She rightly pointed out that the Greek fleet's superior agility and knowledge of the terrain would negate the Persians' numerical strength. But Xerxes, fueled by Pride and the illusion of overwhelming force ignored her. He wanted a decisive victory. What he got was humiliation. As battle unfolded, disorder swept through the Persian fleet. Ships crashed, formations disintegrated, and Greek triremes tore through the chaos like predators. It was a disaster, and amid it all was Artemisia, at the helm of her flagship, surrounded by both allies and enemies, trying to navigate a battlefield, rapidly falling apart. Then came the move that continues to spark debate. With a Greek ship chasing her, Artemisia made a shocking choice. She ordered her ship to ram and sink another Persian vessel, one commanded by a fellow allied king. The Greeks, stunned by what they saw, assumed she must be one of them. They broke off the pursuit. She escaped unharmed. Xerxes, watching from a nearby vantage point, is said to have witnessed this and famously remarked, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." Possibly the highest praise he ever gave a subordinate, especially one who had just sunk a friendly ship to save herself. But Artemisia's maneuver wasn't reckless. It was a calculated act of survival, deception, and quick thinking. She read the battlefield, made a split-second call, and it worked. Her ship, her crew, and her command all remained intact. While many Persian officers perished or were discredited that day, Artemisia returned not as a failure, but as one of the few commanders Xerxes still respected. The Persian fleet limped away from Salamis in defeat. Ships lost, morale in ruins, and the illusion of Persian naval supremacy shattered. For most, it marked the beginning of a long decline. But for Artemisia, it was a strange kind of victory. In the midst of disaster, she stood out as a voice of reason, someone who had both foreseen the loss and navigated it with nerve. Xerxes noticed. Back on land, as the empire reeled from defeat, he turned again to Artemisia. Not as a novelty, but as a trusted advisor. He asked a deeply consequential question. What now? Artemisia, always direct, told him what no emperor wanted to hear: retreat. She urged him to return to Persia and leave General Mardonius in charge of the remaining campaign in Greece. "You've made your point. Athens lies in ruins. Don't gamble with more than you need to," was the essence of her advice. And, remarkably, Xerxes listened. The same king who had disregarded countless military recommendations followed hers. It was a moment that confirmed what many had only guessed. Artemisia was not only brave, but politically formidable. She knew when to strike, when to deceive, and crucially, when to withdraw. Her power didn't lie in brute force, but in clarity, something rare among rulers. In the aftermath, Xerxes entrusted her with the care of his sons, a duty that, in the ancient world, signaled immense trust. You didn't give your heirs to just anyone. Only those with unwavering loyalty and sound judgment were considered. Artemisia, born on the margins of empire, had become central to it. When she returned to Halicarnassus, it wasn't as a queen in question, but as a leader of unquestionable significance. Her story began to echo. She was no longer just a ruler. She became the woman who faced empires and never flinched. Where others might have sought comfort and quiet, Artemisia had gone to war and somehow returned with more influence than before. Her military acumen earned her lasting recognition, but her legacy grew beyond battlefields, largely due to the accounts of Herodotus, the so-called father of history, who coincidentally was born in Halicarnassus, the city she once ruled. This geographic detail adds an intimate layer to his portrayal of her, not as myth, but as monarch. Herodotus didn't reduce her to a moral symbol or a villain. He presented her as something rarer, a sharp, strategic and pragmatic leader. His recounting of the Battle of Salamis emphasizes her clear thinking, the ramming of the Allied ship, her escape under false Greek assumptions, and her brutal cunning. In his hands, Artemisia becomes more than a commander. She becomes a paradox, respected, and feared, celebrated and doubted. Her respect wasn't freely given, it was earned. Though she operated in a world dominated by powerful men like Xerxes and Mardonius, she somehow outshone them. Where they were driven by ambition, she steered by foresight. She knew when to act and when to disappear. That kind of wisdom was rare. Rarer still when it came from a woman in a world that equated femininity with weakness. That might be what fascinated Herodotus most. Artemisia didn't conform. She didn't fit cultural molds or neat historical labels. She wasn't a rebel. Yet she defied. She wasn't a feminist, there was no such term, but she dismantled patriarchy through competence alone. Her legacy wasn't chiseled in statues or proclaimed through lavish monuments. It endured in stories, tales passed on by men who had to admit she had bested them. In councils, she out-reasoned them. On the seas, she outmaneuvered them. In politics, she outlasted them. While other men needed scribes to remember them, Artemisia inspired something deeper. When Herodotus put down his scroll and dipped his pen again, he wasn't just writing a chronicle, he was documenting a puzzle in the form of a queen. And the name Artemisia didn't fade after her death. About a century later, it reappeared, this time as another queen, Artemisia II of Caria, likely a descendant, certainly a namesake, who also ruled Halicarnassus. Though the second Artemisia never led naval battles, she too etched her name into history, literally. She commissioned one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. It was a tomb for her husband, who also happened to be her brother, in true dynastic fashion. But it wasn't just about mourning. It was a statement, a monument to Carian identity, and a reflection of the strength the first Artemisia had embodied. Historians still debate whether these two Artemisias were directly related, mother and daughter, aunt and niece, or perhaps just symbolic successors. But by then, the name Artemisia had already come to represent power, intelligence, and sovereign rule. Her legacy had soaked so deeply into the city's identity that later, rulers wore it like armor. Even more fascinating is how the second Artemisia's tomb gave us the word we use today, mausoleum. A linguistic legacy born from grief, marble, and political theatre. Though known for mourning, she was also a capable governor, continuing a tradition of female authority in a world where that was far from ordinary. Still, it was the first Artemisia who laid the foundation. The naval commander, the queen who counseled Xerxes, the woman who navigated both Greek and Persian worlds, never fully belonging to either, yet mastering both. Without her, the name might have faded, and Halicarnassus might have slipped into obscurity. Instead, it became a beacon, home to 2 formidable women who shaped history, one with warships, the other with stone. Both with a name history couldn't quite erase. Artemisia's story has always existed in the margins, between empires, between roles, between myth and fact. And nowhere is this more evident than in how her legacy has been debated and reshaped through time. Was she a Persian loyalist, a Greek traitor, or just a sovereign making strategic moves while others swung swords? To the Persians, she was a reliable commander, among the few who offered sound advice and fought effectively. Xerxes clearly placed more faith in her than in many of his generals. That alone says a lot about her political skill and calm under pressure. To the Greeks, things were less clear. Many considered her a turncoat, someone who had betrayed her Hellenic background by siding with the Persians. Yet even they, especially Herodotus, couldn't deny her brilliance. She challenged their assumptions, showing that not all Greeks fought for Greece, and not all Persians were the enemy. She broke the boundaries war tried to draw. And today, historians and readers continue to wonder what she represents. A proto-feminist perhaps, but certainly a model of strategic leadership in a world not built for her. Her legacy endures not because she fit expectations, but because she outgrew them, but because she made her mark in military circles. She's still mentioned in naval histories, often as one of the rare women to command warships in the ancient world. In literary and political discourse, she appears as a symbol of rationality in an age defined by arrogance. In pop culture, she occasionally reappears, sometimes misrepresented, sometimes idealized, but always recognizable. Here's the truth. Artemisia wasn't concerned with legacy, not in the way we think of it today. She wasn't branding herself or drafting memoirs. She was focused on survival, leadership, and victory. That's what gives her story its lasting power. It wasn't built on ego or mythology, but on choices, difficult, disputed, and more often than not correct ones. She wasn't a servant of Persia or Greece. She answered only to herself. Over time, Artemisia's story followed the path of all great stories. It transformed. She evolved beyond a historical figure into a symbol, a legend, and occasionally a monster. Writers and playwrights reshaped her to fit their needs. In some stories, she's cast as a dangerous temptress. In others, a bloodthirsty queen. The real Artemisia, strategist, realist, survivor, was buried beneath fiction and fear. Part of this distortion stemmed from one simple fact. Men didn't know what to make of her. A woman who commanded, who stood firm in battle, who corrected kings, and was right, didn't fit the ancient mold. So storytellers did what they often do when confronted by a woman beyond their control. They rewrote her. One strange myth claimed she fell madly in love with a man who didn't return her feelings and hurled herself off a cliff in despair. Not exactly the behavior of a seasoned naval commander, but it suited the story of strength collapsing into tragedy. Another tale painted her as a cunning manipulator, more sorceress than sovereign. It's a familiar pattern in history. When a woman gains power through intellect or boldness, later generations tend to either soften her into a helpless victim or recast her as a villain. Artemisia received both portrayals, neither of which reflected reality. She didn't rule through charm or mysticism. She ruled through foresight, logic, and cold strategic skill. She played a male-dominated game by her own rules, and won. That frightened those who came after her, because if she could do it, what would stop others? Even today, reinterpretations continue to warp her image. Hollywood, for instance, turned her into a revenge-driven femme fatale in 300, Rise of an Empire. Entertaining? Yes. Accurate? Not at all. But the fact that she still garners attention, still sparks reimaginings, proves one thing: her legacy endures. The woman they once feared never truly disappeared. She morphed into myth, memory, and the persistent, uneasy question history keeps returning to: what if more women had been like Artemisia? When Artemisia of Korea disappeared from official records, she didn't vanish from history. She simply changed form, like the wake behind a passing ship. Her influence spread long after her final voyage. There's no grand tomb to mark her grave, no surviving sculpture to capture her features, and yet her presence remains, etched into the stones of Halicarnassus, echoed in ancient texts, and discussed in academic halls by historians still marveling at how she achieved the unthinkable, because Artemisia's life was improbable. She governed at a time when women weren't supposed to lead. She fought battles when women weren't expected to take up arms. She offered counsel when women weren't supposed to speak, and yet her voice carried. She wasn't merely accepted, she earned respect. That might be her rarest accomplishment, not just surviving as a woman in a patriarchal world, but earning the kind of reluctant admiration that made even her adversaries take notice. Centuries later, her name exists in paradox, at once celebrated and overlooked. She never achieved the cultural immortality of a Cleopatra or Joan of Arc, but maybe that's appropriate. Artemisia didn't chase glory, she pursued results. She wasn't mythologized for beauty or tragedy. She was a commander, a realist, a strategist. Her story didn't unfold in poetry, but in war rooms, tight ship decks, and the silent gaze of a king who chose to listen. Today, her story invites a second look, not just as an account of a woman in a male-dominated world, but as a reminder that true courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits in power's shadow, says the necessary thing, and sails headfirst into disorder. Artemisia didn't need rescuing. She didn't need revision. What she needed, what she still deserves, is to be remembered truthfully, sharp, formidable, and brilliant. In an empire built by men, she carved her own path across turbulent waters, against social gravity, and through the chaos of conflict. And as long as ships traverse the seas, and history remembers those who dared to speak when silence was safer, Artemisia of Caria will never truly vanish. Before telescopes and satellites, before Copernicus reordered the cosmos, humanity relied on just two tools to decode the heavens, the naked eye and stone. And remarkably, that was enough. Across the ancient world, people didn't just look up in awe, they looked up with intention. The stars were not mere decoration, they were calendars, navigation tools, deities, and prophecies. And so began the earliest science, astronomy. Long before it had a name, it was a necessity. Farmers depended on it to plant, sailors to steer, priests to time rituals, and astronomers, often indistinguishable from kings, mathematicians, or spiritual leaders, were the authorities everyone turned to. But without telescopes, how did they do it? They built structures, not just for worship, but for observation. Monumental sites like Stonehenge in England, Nabta Playa in Egypt, and the Great Pyramids of Mesoamerica weren't merely ceremonial. They were observatories, carefully aligned. With solar and lunar movements, many of these sites were designed to highlight specific light effects during solstices and equinoxes, sacred structures with astronomical intent. Take the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak in Egypt, for instance. Its alignment allowed the summer solstice sun to rise directly between its towers. Or El Castillo at Chichen Itza, where on equinoxes a shadow resembling a serpent slithers down the pyramid steps. In India, vast stone observatories like Jantar Mantar allowed skywatchers to track celestial positions with remarkable accuracy. These weren't accidents. They weren't wild guesses. They were precise, data-driven feats of cosmic architecture, and they weren't isolated. From the Andes to the Nile, from Babylon to Beijing, humanity constructed with the stars in mind. By sinking stone with starlight, they tracked planetary paths, eclipses, and even retrograde motion, relying solely on patience, careful observation, and a belief in cosmic order. The heavens weren't just admired, they were mapped, measured, and embedded into the core of civilization. Long before lenses revealed the stars more clearly, ancient builders were already recording their rhythms in silence and stone, with incredible precision. In the parched plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians gazed upward and saw not just light but structure. Around 3000 BCE, they weren't simply telling stories about the sky, they were organizing life around it. For them, the heavens held order, and their responsibility was to understand that order. These early skywatchers laid the groundwork for celestial mechanics. Observing the consistent movements of the sun, moon, and planets, they realized these weren't random events, they were timekeepers. That insight led them to one of the earliest known calendars based on lunar cycles. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough to guide farming and religious events. The Sumerians also gave us the sexagesimal system, the base 60 method of counting still used to measure minutes, seconds, and angles. Every time you see 60 minutes in an hour or 360 degrees in a circle, you're engaging with a 5,000-year-old mathematical legacy. Lacking telescopes, they built ziggurats, step towers that reached toward the stars. From these high points, priest astronomers tracked the heavens and recorded their findings on clay tablets. They noted the first appearance of Venus, the crimson hue of a lunar eclipse, or the seasonal return of star clusters. Their term for these experts, umanu, meant learned ones, scientists and spiritual leaders alike. Over time, their observational traditions became more refined. The Babylonians, their intellectual descendants, expanded on Sumerian work, building comprehensive star catalogues, predicting eclipses with impressive accuracy, and naming constellations still recognized today. It all began with the Sumerians carefully carving the sky into cuneiform, the earliest written astronomical record humanity has. What's remarkable is how seamlessly science and mythology intertwined. To the Sumerians, the sky was sacred yet systematic. The gods moved in fixed patterns. If you could grasp those patterns, you could align your crops, ceremonies, and even your destiny. They didn't just gaze at the stars, they measured them. And in doing so, they initiated a bond between humanity and the cosmos that continues to this day. If the Sumerians lit the first flame of astronomy, the Babylonians stoked it into a roaring blaze of precision. By the time their empire flourished, around 1800 BCE, Babylonian astronomers weren't just observing the stars, they were forecasting them. Eclipses, planetary alignments, and retrograde paths were logged, calculated, and anticipated with extraordinary regularity. They weren't relying on guesses, they were applying mathematics. The Babylonians built upon the Sumerians' observational legacy, enhancing it with methodical computations. They created detailed records on clay tablets, such as the Enuma Anu Enlil and the Mul Apin, among the oldest known astronomical texts. These documents were not myths, they were raw data. Line after line recorded when Venus rose, how long it stayed visible, when a solar eclipse was expected. These tablets were essentially the world's first astronomical almanacs. Perhaps most impressive, they used the Saros cycle, a pattern of about 18 years, to predict lunar eclipses. They didn't know why it worked, but they knew that it worked. In a culture where divination and astronomy were closely linked, forecasting celestial events meant wielding immense religious and political influence. Though the Greeks are often credited with inventing the zodiac, it was the Babylonians who first divided the sky into 12 equal parts, each anchored by a constellation. They laid the foundation for the zodiac signs, still referenced today. So yes, when someone asks your astrological sign, you're drawing on Babylonian innovation. What truly set them apart was their mathematical approach. They charted even the backward, retrograde motions of planets using arithmetic, not geometric models. Geometry would come later with the Greeks. But for practical purposes, Babylonian arithmetic did the job, and did it well. They saw the cosmos as a system of patterns, a ledger to be deciphered. Their astronomers weren't just spiritual guides, they were early scientists, bent over tablets, translating the rhythms of the universe into numbers and symbols. In the quiet of the night, they inscribed the sky. Architecture in ancient Egypt was a form of cosmological engineering. Egyptian priests often doubled as astronomers, studying the skies not merely to time rituals, but to read signs, omens, and interpret the will of the gods. In Egypt, astronomy, theology, and governance were deeply connected. Ruling the land required understanding the heavens. What's astonishing is that without telescopes or even lenses, they created a sophisticated system for tracking time, orienting structures, and predicting natural events, all based on consistent observation and remarkable precision. The Egyptians didn't gaze at the stars for amusement. They saw a divine mechanism, a cosmic clock echoing eternal order. Far away in the jungles of Mesoamerica, long before European contact, the Maya developed one of the most advanced astronomical systems the world had ever known. Without metal tools, wheels, or telescopes, they charted the movements of the sun, moon, stars, and planets with incredible accuracy, still admired by modern scholars. For the Maya, astronomy wasn't a luxury or an academic pursuit. It formed the foundation of their entire civilization. Their rulers were viewed as celestial intermediaries, and every major religious or political event was synchronized with astronomical occurrences. Eclipses, solstices, equinoxes, and the Venus cycle weren't just observed. They were crucial to legitimizing leadership and timing wars. Among their most impressive feats was tracking Venus. The Maya recognized its 584-day cycle of disappearance and reappearance and incorporated this rhythm into their warfare and calendar systems. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian texts, includes a Venus table that charts its movements across centuries, accurate to within a single day. Their innovation didn't end there. The Maya created the long count calendar, capable of measuring vast stretches of time. They understood the solar year as 365.20 days, remarkably close to today's value, and maintained several calendars concurrently: the 260-day Tzolk'in for rituals, the 365-day Hab for solar time, and the long count for historical record-keeping. Maya observatories weren't domes of glass but marvels of stone engineering. El Caracol at Chichen Itza featured special openings aligned to track the sun and Venus. Temples incorporated staircases and shadow effects tied to equinoxes, like the famous serpent-shaped shadow at El Castillo. The Maya weren't merely observing the heavens, they aligned their civilization with it. Their kings ruled by celestial cycles, their temples mirrored cosmic patterns, and even wars followed the paths of planets. They didn't just study the cosmos, they embedded it into the structure of life. In ancient China, astronomy was more than scientific. It was a matter of governance. The emperor, seen as the son of heaven, ruled with divine approval that could be revoked if celestial signs turned ominous. Astronomy was both sacred and political. Shifts in the heavens could mean the fall of a dynasty. As early as 2000 BCE, Chinese astronomers were recording celestial events meticulously: eclipses, sunspots, comets, novas, and planetary movements. Some of these records, found in texts like the Shiji and Book of Han, are still referenced by modern scientists to confirm historical astronomical phenomena. One of their most impressive observations was the supernova of 1054 CE, visible in daylight. For 23 days, Chinese astronomers logged its position with such precision that today's scientists use their data to locate what we now call the Crab Nebula. But Chinese astronomy wasn't solely mystical. It involved innovative tools like armillary spheres and gnomons to measure celestial angles and solar altitude. They even created water-powered celestial globes and mechanical clocks centuries before Europe developed similar technology. The Chinese sky was divided into 28 lunar mansions, comparable to Western constellations, which helped with navigation and timekeeping. Their lunar-solar calendar balanced moon cycles with the solar year and is still used today for marking traditional holidays like Lunar New Year. A core contribution was their rigorous eclipse records. Solar and lunar eclipses were not only predicted, but interpreted as political warnings. Failing to foresee an eclipse could be considered an imperial failure, possibly signaling the loss of the mandate of heaven. In China, astronomy wasn't confined to scholars. It was central to politics, spirituality, and survival. The stars conveyed more than time. They spoke truth, and the empire listened. In ancient India, astronomy was never isolated from other domains. It was blended with ritual, mathematics, metaphysics, and philosophy. Known as Jyotisha, or the science of light, Indian astronomy began as a method for determining auspicious, ritual timings, but evolved into one of the world's most advanced mathematical systems for celestial study. The earliest references to astronomical phenomena appear in the Vedas, written around 1500 BCE. These sacred texts mention planetary cycles and divide the sky into 27 nakshatras, lunar mansions, that became fundamental to both mythology and precise timekeeping. These divisions still form the basis of Indian astrology and calendars today. Indian astronomy, though poetic, was also mathematically exact. Ancient Indian scholars developed models for the solar year that outperformed the later Julian calendar. The Surya Siddhanta, compiled around 500 CE from earlier sources, described Earth's axial tilt, elliptical planetary orbits, and even gravity, centuries before Newton. Among the most groundbreaking figures was Aryabhata, who in 499 CE proposed the Earth's daily rotation, a rare idea in that era. He also calculated the solar year at 365.358 days, nearly identical to modern values, and developed early trigonometric functions for astronomy. Indian astronomers worked with decimal systems, used shadow instruments and spheres, and constructed observatories aligned with solstices and planetary conjunctions. Yet beyond technical skill, Indian astronomy carried spiritual depth. The cosmos wasn't a machine, it was a living cycle. Understanding the sky was a way to understand oneself. For Indian thinkers, the stars didn't just move across space, they traveled through the soul. While other cultures looked to the sky for timing or prophecy, the ancient Greeks looked upward and asked why. Why do the stars move? Why do planets wander? Could the universe be explained by reason? Greek astronomy marked a turning point from mythic observation to rational theory. Thales of Miletus was among the first to suggest natural explanations for celestial events. Then came Anaximander, who proposed Earth floated unsupported in space, and that the heavens formed a sphere. Crude ideas now, but revolutionary then. Pythagoras elevated this thinking by describing the cosmos as a system of perfect harmony, a music of the spheres governed by mathematical ratios. His followers believed numbers could reveal the structure of the universe, laying the groundwork for theoretical astronomy. The most forward-thinking of all was Aristarchus of Samos. In the 3rd century BCE, he proposed a heliocentric model with the sun at the center, not the Earth. Though his ideas were ignored for 2 millennia, they paved the way for Copernicus. Then came Hipparchus, the father of observational astronomy. He produced the first star catalogue, categorized stars by brightness, discovered the precession of the equinoxes, and pioneered trigonometric methods for celestial mapping, all without telescopes. Claudius Ptolemy later synthesized Greek, Egyptian, and Babylonian knowledge into the Almagest, a geocentric system using epicycles to explain planetary movement. Though eventually outdated, this model reigned for over 1,000 years. While some Greek conclusions were incorrect, their dedication to rational modeling transformed our relationship with the cosmos. They demonstrated that celestial motion wasn't random. It followed intelligible patterns. With the Greeks, astronomy became a dialogue between reason and myth, between what we see and what we understand. By the time telescopes emerged in the 17th century, humanity had already spent millennia studying the heavens with nothing but eyes, shadows, and stone. Yet the accomplishments of those early civilizations remain breathtaking. They tracked stars, mapped planetary paths, predicted eclipses, and constructed monuments aligned with solstices and equinoxes, all without modern tools. What makes this even more remarkable is that they did it independently. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Maya in the Americas, the Chinese and Indians in Asia, the Greeks and Egyptians around the Mediterranean, each developed their own astronomical systems, grounded in their unique worldviews. Yet they reached similar insights. The heavens move with order, and that order is meaningful. Ancient astronomy wasn't locked away in scholarly texts. It shaped agriculture, religion, politics, architecture, and philosophy. It dictated when to sow, when to build, when to fight, and when to pray. In every culture, understanding the sky meant understanding the divine, or at least humanity's place in the cosmos. Whether their models were mythic, geocentric, or cyclical, they all shared a deep reverence for the sky. For these ancient peoples, the heavens were not inert. They were alive, meaningful, and sacred. Telescopes would eventually change everything. They revealed moons around Jupiter, the phases of Venus, sunspots, and galaxies beyond imagination. But the groundwork, the maps, the logs, the wonder that came from the ancients. Today, their legacy lives on in every calendar, GPS satellite, and astronomical app. They didn't know about black holes or background radiation, but they asked profound questions. They looked up, they noticed patterns, and in doing so, they became the first scientists, quietly, patiently inscribing their questions into the stars. Because of them, we now have the tools to look deeper, not only into space, but into the origins of who we are. A blank canvas for national expansion, growth, and inevitably, conflict. While newspapers celebrated the acquisition, one truth remained, largely ignored. This land wasn't empty. It was already home to dozens of native nations, each with its own history, alliances, and claims. So, a deal struck in Paris wouldn't just change maps. It would alter lives across an entire continent. At the center of the Louisiana Purchase was a man with a crown and a crisis, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1803, the French emperor was stretched thin, engaged in wars across Europe, struggling in the Caribbean, and facing a strained treasury. So, in a move that surprised nearly everyone, he offered to sell off a third of North America to the very country he once hoped to keep from rising to continental power. That wasn't his original plan. A few years earlier, France had quietly taken Louisiana from Spain under the Treaty of San Ildefonso. Napoleon had ambitious dreams of reviving a French colonial empire. Louisiana was meant to supply food and goods to Saint-Domingue, France's prized Caribbean colony, today known as Haiti. France didn't seek Louisiana for its own sake. It wanted it to support sugar production. But that dream fell apart in rebellion and disease. The Haitian Revolution, led by formerly enslaved people under figures like Toussaint Louverture, erupted into full-scale resistance. France sent tens of thousands of troops to suppress it, only to lose most of them to combat and yellow fever. Napoleon lost his top general, his army, and his hope of reclaiming the richest sugar colony in the world. With Saint-Domingue slipping beyond his grasp, Louisiana became pointless, worse, indefensible. And with Britain preparing for another war against France, Napoleon feared Louisiana might be seized by force. So rather than fight to hold it, he chose to sell it. As always, Napoleon moved quickly, boldly, and practically. On April 11, 1803, he shocked American envoys Robert Livingston and James Monroe with an offer: the entire Louisiana territory, not just New Orleans, for $15 million. His reasoning? He'd handed England a rival that might one day challenge her dominance. For Napoleon, the sale wasn't just about funds, it was strategy. So in one transaction, he gave up on his American empire and reshaped the destiny of a country he didn't particularly admire. What to him was an afterthought would become the springboard for America's expansion westward, and the start of the end for native sovereignty across the continent. President Thomas Jefferson had long imagined a nation of independent farmers, citizens tied to their land, united by liberty and civic duty. The Louisiana Purchase should have fulfilled that vision. Instead, it gave him a constitutional dilemma. Jefferson believed in strict constructionism, the idea that the federal government could only exercise powers clearly outlined in the Constitution. Nowhere did the document authorize the purchase of foreign territory. There was no clause for acquiring an entire continent, no legal guide for doubling the nation's size in one deal. Jefferson hesitated. The offer from Napoleon seemed almost unbelievable. $15 million for land spanning from the Mississippi River to the Rockies. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a civilization's lifetime. But Jefferson wrestled with the contradiction. Could he, a president wary of federal overreach, justify such a vast expansion? Privately, he considered proposing a constitutional amendment to authorize the deal, but time was short. Napoleon could change his mind, or Britain could seize the territory before negotiations concluded. So Jefferson made an ironic move. He embraced implied powers, the very idea he had criticized Alexander Hamilton for endorsing. He justified the purchase as a treaty which the Constitution allowed with Senate approval. In October 1803, the Senate ratified the deal with strong support. Jefferson, though privately uneasy, defended the decision as essential for national survival and security. In doing so, the constitutional purist became the driving force behind the largest peaceful land acquisition in U.S. history. His critics called him hypocritical, but Jefferson saw it as a necessary stretch of the Constitution, one made to preserve the Republic, not undermine it. That precedent, that land could be acquired by treaty even without explicit constitutional backing, would be used repeatedly as the U.S. pushed west into already inhabited lands. The Louisiana Purchase was signed, sealed, and ratified, but no one really knew what the United States had just bought. The territory was immense, sparsely mapped, and filled with unknown rivers, mountains, species, and peoples. In 1804, Jefferson commissioned an expedition that would become one of the most iconic in American history, the Corps of Discovery, led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their mission was broad: explore the new land, establish trade with native nations, assess natural resources, and, most importantly, search for a water route to the Pacific. Jefferson envisioned a Northwest Passage, a navigable waterway linking the Atlantic and Pacific that could transform trade. It didn't exist, but what Lewis and Clark discovered still reshaped Americans' understanding of the continent. They departed from St. Louis in May 1804 with over 30 men, heading upriver into lands untouched by American settlers. Along the way, they documented more than 100 new animal species and 178 plants. They mapped rivers, drew mountain ranges, and kept meticulous notes on the land and its people. One of the most important members of the expedition was Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman who joined with her French-Canadian husband. She was far more than a translator. Her presence with a baby conveyed peace to native tribes. Her knowledge of the terrain and diplomacy helped the team survive dangerous terrain and form vital alliances. Over 2 years, the expedition covered more than 8,000 miles by boat, horseback, and foot. They reached the Pacific in November 1805, built a fort to survive the winter, and returned east by 1806. They didn't find a Northwest Passage, but what they brought back, a detailed account of the new land and its people, was perhaps even more valuable. Jefferson had purchased a mystery. Lewis and Clark helped reveal its shape. Their discoveries inspired dreams of expansion, but also hinted at a darker reality: the growing pressure on indigenous nations and the inevitable move toward conquest, framed as exploration. To American leaders and settlers, the Louisiana Purchase was a gold mine, a blank canvas for agriculture, development and ambition. But for the native nations who had lived there for centuries, it meant something else entirely: the beginning of erasure. The land the US acquired was already inhabited by over 50 sovereign indigenous nations, each with distinct languages, territories, and governance systems. From the Osage and Sioux to the Cheyenne, Comanche, and Mandan, these communities had long managed trade, formed alliances, and governed themselves, well before any European claims. But to Jefferson and future leaders, the Louisiana Territory appeared vast, underutilized, and ready for settlement. The native nations living there weren't consulted in the purchase. They weren't notified or compensated. Overnight, sovereign peoples were declared subjects of an expanding republic. Jefferson believed native people could either assimilate into American society or relocate, peacefully if possible, forcibly if necessary. In private letters, he wrote that as settlers moved west, indigenous peoples would have to move farther or face extinction. It wasn't yet called removal, but the concept had already formed. Pressure mounted after Lewis and Clark returned with news of abundant resources. The federal government began negotiating treaties, many deceptive or coercive, to acquire land and push tribes westward. In some cases, military force was used. In others, disease and displacement carried out the job. The Louisiana Purchase marked a new phase of U.S. expansion, manifest destiny before it had a name. The belief that the U.S. was meant to span the continent was legally rooted in this sale and morally borne by native lives and lands. For indigenous nations, the Louisiana Purchase wasn't a deal. It was a violation. It redrew maps that had never recognized their borders, erased systems of governance, and opened the floodgates to settlers who came not to partner, but to claim. And that wave had just begun. The Louisiana Purchase was celebrated as a landmark achievement, a peaceful land deal that nearly doubled the size of the United States. But while the transaction appeared clean on paper, the real cost played out across generations in conflict, dispossession, and cultural upheaval. With the new territory secured, settlers rushed west in search of farmland, independence, and prosperity. They entered lands still inhabited by native nations. The federal government soon followed, building forts, roads, and administrative outposts to assert control. This set the stage for a long, grinding clash between two ways of understanding land. One that viewed it as property to be owned and improved, and another that saw it as sacred and communal. Conflict was inevitable. Skirmishes turned into wars. Treaties were negotiated and broken. Slowly, the frontier advanced, driven by guns, trains, and an unyielding pursuit of expansion. And it wasn't just native nations that bore the cost. The Louisiana Territory deepened an existing moral crisis: slavery. Southern leaders quickly recognized the potential to expand plantation economies. Cotton and sugar thrived in the southern regions of the territory, and enslaved labor was seen as essential. This raised a divisive question: would slavery be allowed in these new lands? That question would haunt American politics, leading to the Missouri Compromise, intensifying regional divides, and eventually helping to trigger the Civil War. The Louisiana Purchase didn't just expand U.S. borders, it stretched its political system to its limits. The environmental impact was profound, too. Rivers were dammed, plains plowed, and buffalo nearly driven to extinction. The transformation of the land was swift and permanent. What had once been a vast, interconnected ecosystem became something entirely new, redrawn, divided, and reimagined through the lens of American ambition, and indigenous stewardship gave way to a patchwork of farms, fences, and industrial extraction. In taking the land, the United States also took on the weight of its actions, a legacy still resonating in today's debates over land rights, tribal sovereignty, and reparations. While the land was officially purchased, the true cost continues to unfold. Once the ink dried on the Louisiana Purchase, a new challenge emerged: how to govern a territory so immense it defied comprehension. The land spanned what would become parts or all of 15 modern U.S. states, from Louisiana to Montana, from the Dakotas to Colorado. But in 1803, it remained a vast, undefined wilderness, rich with potential, but lacking roads, towns, and stable jurisdiction. The first step was mapping it, charting borders, rivers, mountains, and future property lines. Expeditions like those of Lewis and Clark, Zebulon Pike, and others laid the foundation. Cartographers, land speculators, and military engineers followed, gradually converting open land into county lines, reservations, and state borders. What had once been a connected indigenous landscape was divided into geometric sections. Congress passed laws to organize this new territory, initially as military zones, then as formal territories with federally appointed governors. These structures followed the framework of the Northwest Ordinance. Once a territory had enough settlers, it could apply for statehood, but not all borders were logical or just. Consider Missouri's admission in 1821, the first state created from the purchase. Its request to allow slavery sparked national controversy. The Missouri Compromise drew a symbolic line through the purchase: slavery permitted to the South, banned to the North. That single line would stir political tensions for decades, each new state threatening to upset the balance between North and South. Meanwhile, white settlers flooded into these lands, often outpacing the law. They claimed land through preemption, squatting, and increasingly through federally backed land grants. Indigenous communities, even those with existing treaties, saw their land abruptly reclassified, from sovereign territory to public domain to private farms. As maps were drawn, they also erased. Native trails disappeared. Seasonal migrations were cut off. Indigenous names were replaced with names like Jefferson City, Baton Rouge, and Fort Pierre. In this new American vision, borders weren't just geographic, they were mechanisms of control, used to divide, claim, govern, and sell land that had never belonged to a president, a state, or an empire. The Louisiana Purchase didn't just redraw the map, it redefined the nation's identity. With one diplomatic move, the U.S. shifted from a coastal republic to a continental power. It marked the first major leap toward manifest destiny, even before the term existed, setting the tone for a century of expansion, conquest, and transformation. Politically, the purchase established a precedent. The federal government could acquire territory through treaties, even in the absence of explicit constitutional direction. That model would later guide the acquisitions of Florida, Texas, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii. The U.S. became not just a nation, but a land-acquiring force, always looking westward. Culturally, it birthed a new American myth, the frontier. The Louisiana Territory became the backdrop for tales of resilient pioneers, fearless explorers, and limitless opportunity. But each dream of the frontier was paired with a nightmare for indigenous peoples, a memory of displacement, broken treaties, and forced exile. Economically, the impact was immense. The Mississippi River became the backbone of American commerce. Cities like St. Louis, New Orleans, and Kansas City evolved into major trade centers. Fertile plains turned into farmland. The discovery of gold, silver, and other resources transformed the region into a foundation of industrial growth. Yet the deeper legacy is a contradiction. The purchase represented American ideals: opportunity, growth, independence, but also embodied its greatest injustices: dispossession, slavery, imperialism. It was a story of achievement, written on land seized from others, often violently. Today, the boundaries of the Louisiana Purchase outline states home to millions. Highways run where buffalo once roamed. Wheat fields grow over what were once sacred grounds. And beneath the roads and cities, the memory of that purchase lingers, not just as a financial deal, but as a pivotal moment in American history. It was more than a land acquisition. It signaled a shift from a fragile republic on the Atlantic coast to an emerging empire expanding into the interior. Though signed in Paris, the consequences were felt across rivers, plains, and generations. For the US, it sparked a sense of destiny and confidence, a belief that expansion wasn't just possible, but inevitable. That idea hardened into policy, becoming manifest destiny, and ultimately pushed the country to the Pacific and beyond. It also cemented a national model, power gained through land, displacement, and development. The West was no longer unknown. It was a target. And for settlers, speculators, and politicians, it was an invitation, an opportunity gained by uprooting existing cultures. For indigenous nations, this change was devastating. Land they had inhabited, traded across, and defended was suddenly owned by a distant government that claimed it had simply purchased it. There were no negotiations, no consent, just a line on a map and a new rulebook. The influx of American settlers accelerated cycles of violence, removals, and cultural collapse. Treaties were made and broken, reservations were drawn. Bison were hunted to near extinction. Languages and traditions began to fade. By the time it was over, the native presence in the Louisiana Territory had been mostly confined, silenced, or erased, though not entirely extinguished. Still, the legacy of the purchase is layered. The city's infrastructure and economic systems that developed from it helped shape the modern US. The rivers became commercial lifelines. The land offered space for growth, reinvention, and diversity. But the cost remains. The Louisiana Purchase stands as a paradox, a diplomatic success, and a framework for displacement. It is a story of expansion paired with loss, of ambition alongside forgetting. It shaped the United States, but also forced a reckoning that persists today. How do you honor a land that was never truly offered and can never truly be returned?